All right, everybody, looks like we're live now. Welcome. My name's Scott Maier. This is Drawing Together with Artists Network. So we meet every Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern to draw together. And this is what I'm working on today. So if you'd like to follow along, I love to see everybody doing their best. And then sharing your work, you'll find a link pinned to the top of the chat where you can then share your work when you're done, or you can find it in the description below, where you can also find the reference image. So that's the one right below me here. So if you want to bring that up on a full screen to work from, that's great. If you just want to follow along later after watching this, then that's fine too. So we get everybody has a different kind of take on this show, but this is really all about us getting together once a week so that we can draw and improve our skills, think about drawing and how we can apply it to other media. If you're a painter, if you're a sculptor, whatever, even if this is the only art you do, this is what the show is all about. So welcome. I love seeing all your familiar names there. Looks like we have a nice big group today. So again, this is what we're working on today. This is a cool photo of this ram, this bighorn that I found. And of course, the star of this piece are the horns. They're just really cool objects. So that I saw this photo. It's not necessarily an ideal photo, mostly just because we have some decent lighting in here, but we get this area down in here where it starts to flatten out a little bit. But there's just a wonderful light on the horns that I think we want to try to capture. And so the challenge today is, how do we capture this in such a short time, relatively? So we talk about that a lot in this show. Is that the process that I like to follow is one that allows us to stay in control of how much detail we include. So if you want to keep it loose and gestural, you can do that. If you want to take it to an extreme where you're getting every fine detail, you can do that. And I think this is one of those subjects that really give us a lot to play with. So you can see there's just all this kind of really lovely texture in the horns that we can focus on. My goal here is to try to get something that approximates that texture and use that power of suggestion to kind of create that texture without really getting in there and hammering away at all the individual details. But again, hopefully this process sets you up in a way where if you do want to stick with this and really put in the hours to get all of that detail, you can do that as well. So you can see in this preparatory sketch, I was kind of playing around with some of those ideas. The biggest challenge that I had with this is getting those proportions right. So I'm going to try to stay focused on that in the beginning. Let's talk through some additional materials. I'm going to just be using, I've got this Derwent Onyx pencil, and I have a Prismacolor ebony pencil. They're pretty similar to one another. I'm going to primarily use the Derwent, but I have the Prismacolor as a backup if this starts to get dull. So I'm just going to stick with one pencil throughout the whole thing. And as you know, I really like the softer graphite versus the harder ones. So sometimes I use the harder ones in the initial phases and then move to a softer as we need to get darker values. But I found that it doesn't translate to video quite as effectively, so I'm going to just go with the darker one. And it's the material I prefer to use anyway. So, but if you are using charcoal, if you're using a full set of graphite pencils, go for it. Really, this is all about finding your own way through this drawing and whatever is satisfying to you. So those are the pencils. Erasers, I've got my Tombow Mono Zero eraser, and I've got this Derwent, a retractable one that you can see I've shaved down, I've sharpened to this chisel point. That'll help to get some of those details in there. Of course, my Kneaded eraser that I'll use to kind of clean things up as we go, and a blending stump. This is a well-used one that will come in handy as we get into the texture of the horns there. So this is just an 8x10 that I'm working on. It's just a smooth white drawing paper, nothing fancy. So if you want to work larger, it can sometimes take a little bit more time, but often with something that's as detailed as this, has so much texture involved, it can sometimes actually be a little bit more forgiving to work a little bit larger, and it can end up pulling together faster if you bump things up a little bit. So just to kind of play around with some of that and see where that goes. If you do have any questions, I love to see them. I'm going to do my best to answer them, but if you type them in all caps, it helps me identify them. And I love to hear the answers that you all have to other questions. Any observations, feel free to shout that out, point out any corrections, any errors that I might have in the drawing. or if you just get curious about where I'm at and in a certain stage, just shout out. So it's all good here. So let's just get to it. I kind of have to get my head in the game a little bit. So I'm like, yeah, that's right. I'm drawing right now. So everything starts with a gesture. And again, my general philosophy is that it's about, the drawing process is the continual refinement of that gesture. And I think the approach that I want to take today is to think of the mass of the object over the line. So there's really kind of two fundamental ways in which we kind of interpret the forms. You can think about the contour lines, the lines that represent the outer edges of a three-dimensional object, or you can think about it in terms of mass. And so I'm going to try to think about it as a mass and shape first, to try to block in these larger areas. And my hope is that it will help me to identify the proportions a little bit more quickly. So getting to the point where I'm just using the side of the pencil, and you can see the way I've sharpened it. I'm exposing an inch or inch and a half of that core. It's not very sharp right there, but and that allows me to really get in there and use the side of the pencil. When we have something that's kind of fresh out of the box, like here's a white pencil, and you can see how short it's kind of sharpened down. It really forces you to use a grip like this, a tripod grip, and that then limits you to using the tip of the pencil. And I find that using an overhand grip is a bit more versatile, so I prefer to use that. And I would just want to kind of react to the form. And one of the things that I really enjoy seeing is the play between the positive and negative space in the shape of the horn here, where we have kind of a darker shaded side here against a lighter background. But as we come and wrap around the form, it transitions where this part then is light against a darker background. And so I'm going to emphasize that a little bit. And the goal with the gesture is to just kind of react quickly, simply to the form, get something on the page that we can react to and make specific decisions that will kind of correct the drawing. And if you want to kind of bypass this whole step, there's nothing wrong with tracing. For the purposes of this exercise, I'm kind of accepting that challenge of trying to arrive at the correct proportions because I want to strengthen that skill. So it's an intentional choice to try to strengthen that skill. And it may not be the most efficient if your goal is to arrive at a fully rendered and accurate drawing. You might kind of bypass this again by tracing. You can print out the image. An easy way to do that is to print out the image. Let's see if I have I'll just bring this one up. You flip it over, tone it with graphite on the back, and when you flip it back over, you would trace along the outer edges, and it would transfer some of the graphite. It's like using a sheet of graphite transfer paper. But again, my objective here is to develop my skills, not necessarily do a great drawing. I want to have a good drawing experience. And so as a result, I'm making that choice to try to kind of power through and get these proportions accurately. It's really kind of a key feature in drawing is being aware of your proportions. So sometimes you might artificially skew them. If you think about like some of these great caricature artists that are out there, their heightened sense of awareness of proportions is what leads to effective, their effective artwork and kind of capturing the subject. But it's intentionally inaccurate. It's designed to be arrive at something that's deeper. And when I say accurate, I'm talking about kind of duplicating the reference one-to-one. So I think I have enough of that form established here. You can see that I'm just trying to establish that initial shape and that basic play in values between dark and light, and then here with the horn gradually becoming lighter here against that darker background. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe this down using a paper towel. There's some sort of flaw there on the paper, but we'll deal with that. And then I'm going to keep building that again. And now with this next pass, I have points of reference that I can be referring to start to create more correct proportions. And so as I'm working down here, for example, there's this neck, I can start to look at this relationship here. How far in from the edge do I need to be? And what is the relationship between this distance and this distance? And so a great tool to use that if you're new is a tool called Comparative Measuring. So in this case, I have my reference image in front of me, and it's right here on the left. I have my drawing on the right. With one eye closed, it flattens my depth perception, and I can use this pencil as a guide. I can place it directly on top of the reference now, and I can take this measurement. So I'm aligning this edge of the pencil with the edge of the reference photo. I'm sliding my thumb down so that it aligns with this portion of the RAM there, and that gives me a measurement, and I can compare that then to this distance over here. I can physically kind of transfer that across. So, geez, almost. I don't like dropping my pencils, then it breaks those tips, and it takes a while to sharpen them this way. So there's that moment of panic when I drop a pencil. So what I notice in the reference image is that this distance here, if I transfer it across, it should just carry us right beyond the tip of that curve. So that's a good sign that relationship is working out okay. I'm going to take that distance, actually. I'm going to use that as a base unit. And what I observe is if I compare this distance again here to the height of the horns, generally it's about 1.5 height. And so what I see is that this horn right here is too high. I can then double check that against some plumb lines here. So as I start to establish, say, the mouth here, and if I'm happy with that, or generally happier, then I can take a horizontal guide, carry that across, and then I can compare that to the horn. So if I take an angle here, if I hold my pencil up over the reference and I'm aligning it with the bottom of its mouth, or the bottom chin, this, let's see, it means the horn would actually come down somewhere more like this. So this tip that I've got here needs to come down. And I'm intentionally using, again, the side of the pencil because it creates a lighter mark that kind of floats on the surface of the page a bit more, and it creates a broader mark. Because right now I'm not getting 100% accuracy. I'm not going for 100% accuracy. I'm trying to just narrow the playing field with regards to those proportions. So I'm trying to get a little bit closer, but with a wider mark, I have some flexibility in there. And then if that playing field is closer, then I can then narrow that down even farther. I think one of the things that I've learned over my years of drawing is that I have to fight that urge to kind of arrive at the correct proportions too early, and instead kind of settle for again, like 75% accuracy early on. And part of that is because I still have to take some time to figure out what those accurate proportions are. So I don't want my drawing to be at a stage where I'm thinking of it as being 100% accurate when my kind of understanding of the subject is still only partially formed, if that makes sense. I don't want to have my drawing get ahead of my observations. So this now is becoming a bit of an anchor, and as I get to this, I can start to think about the relationship between the positive space and the negative space. So again, the positive space is everything that is the object you're observing. The negative space is the shape formed around that. So in this case, we have this kind of really distinct kind of mushroom shape here. And within that, we have a variation of value. It starts dark here, it ends light. And then with the horn, it starts light here, and it ends up dark against that. So we have this really nice play between light and dark. So it becomes a little bit of a challenge to see that negative space, that negative shape, but I'm going to do my best to start to observe that. And then as I go through that, I can start to layer on the concept of these intersecting lines. And so if we observe the back of the sheep, it intersects that horn at a very specific point. And so I want to pay attention to that. I want to see how that intersects the ear here. And then if we were to carry that on, where it would intersect the horn. We come over here and we can see the back of the sheep emerging from that horn, and we can pay attention to the specific point there. So we're starting to get closer. I still feel like this is a bit too high. So let me, part of what is happening is that I'm looking at it at this angle here, and I'm starting to make those proportion decisions based on my direct observation here, and that's actually inaccurate. I need to be using the projection in front of me that's vertical, more like what you're seeing here on the screen. So, I'm going to kind of work both the chin and the horn together. Let's see, if I take this measurement again and to compare it to the height of the horn, it should be about 1.5. So we're getting closer, and I feel pretty good about this distance up here. So I'm going to kind of anchor that down, and I'm feeling good about like this negative space. But I feel like I need to continue to work on this, and it might be a matter of again, bringing everything down here. So I want to take a quick break here, see if there's any questions. Heather, welcome. JC, Astrid, Mary, Linda, Rebecca. Nell Art is wondering if I could draw a tree. That's a good suggestion. That would be a great one. I don't think I've done that. There's been a few landscapes in which the trees become elements, but it would be interesting to focus on kind of do a portrait of a tree. Great idea, and Cynthia is confirming as well. All right. Who else is drawing along? Anybody else? All right, I think what I want to do, I'm going to kind of set an anchor here with the snout. I'm feeling pretty good about the proportions here, feeling better than the horns. And so I'm going to use this as a way to guide this. So rather than, even though this is going to essentially be the centerpiece of the drawing, rather than start with that and anchor that down, I'm going to start with a smaller part and build everything else around that. And so this is just for the purposes of getting those proportions accurately established. I'm going to give a little bit more structure here and try to visualize that there's kind of a central axis to the snout here, into the forehead, and in between the horns. I'm going to try to roughly establish that. And all I'm doing now is, I said this is my anchor, but I need to create a transition over there. I need ways to connect this piece to this piece visually. And so by stepping from here to here, that starts to create a transition. There's a nice anchor here where these two horns intersect. So if I drop a plumb line down here, a vertical line, I can see where it should intersect and how it relates to this. So one of the things you can do is use the side of your paper as a guide. So in this case, I'm just taking the nail of my pinky and I'm running it along the side of the paper here. I don't know if we can quite see it. and then kind of locking the pencil in place in my hand, just kind of scoring down. And if I compare that to the reference photo, and I look at this shape here that's formed by this division, I think it's pretty close. I think it's close enough to keep going, and then we can kind of massage that proportion a bit more. And then I notice the eye is going to start just to the right of that plumb line. And now what I want to do is I want to compare the placement of the eye to the center. So the center of the paper is just to the right of the eye. Let's see if that's the center. So I have the center of the paper here. And I might need to shift this over a little bit. If this is the center of the paper, the eye is just to the left of center. Now I'm going to check its height vertically. And it pretty much divides the paper here. It's almost right smack dab in the middle. It's just off to the left of center, but it's equidistant from the top to bottom. And so we're sticking with these proportions for a while, a little bit longer. And my hope is that as I continue to block this in, and I'm just building up all these tones, that this is going to contribute to the texture later on. And so then what that will mean, if I'm doing things properly, is that all the work that I'm doing in the proportions it kind of serves as a double purpose. Again, it's just building the ground for the texture. All right, so now what I'm looking at is I'm looking to create a horizontal guide from the tip of that horn, carrying it across to the snout there. And if I compare that to the reference, it's pretty darn close. I feel like it just needs to come down a little bit. And this is a great place for any of you, if you have specific observations, feel free to type them out, send them my way. If anything looks specifically off. You know, if I look at the reference, I feel like I'm not giving enough space over here. So what do I want to do now? How do I figure that out? I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. That's an interesting thing. So what I'm observing is that this tip here it perfectly divides this distance from here. So from here to here, if I divide that in half, it should lead me to the tip of that horn. And so if I am comfortable with this, now I need to find that center point. So that would suggest that the tip of the horn actually needs to move over, maybe somewhere down around here. And I'm going to keep the old marks on the page for now, so I can really see how the forms are moving. So it's all very minor, but I think it's going to make a big difference in the end if I really just focus on getting this form right. Now let me take the distance from the edge of the canvas, edge of the reference photo, to the edge of the horn, so this distance here. And it should be about almost 1.5. So I feel like this needs to come in something like this. And then when you're getting to the curve of the horn, you might find it helpful to break that curve down into a sequence of short straight marks rather than try to get one curve. Try to break it apart into these sections so you can really see the correct curve, the specific curve. All right, that feels a little bit better in terms of those proportions. So I'm getting closer, and this is going to be a mess. We haven't talked about it in a while, but everybody who's been with us for a while knows the termly ugly duckling stage, and I think this is definitely going to hit that. And that idea is that every drawing tends to kind of hit this ugly duckling stage where you feel like, I'm not sure if this is going to come together. And I guess when I say every drawing for me, may not be for everybody else. I see some artists' work and processes that are a bit more controlled. I kind of like to get into the mud of the materials a little bit and in the subject and work through some issues on the page. And as a result, it can end up messy. But I guess that's just the way I work. Because again, I'm trying to solve these problems through the drawing process rather than try to figure it all out and then use the drawing process as merely a means to execute an image. But that's just, again, my way of working. That's what the show is all about, is kind of sharing different ways of conceiving of the drawing process. How does it fit in with our lives differently? All right, so now I'm going to move to this horn here and start to refine this. Take some angle sighting. So I'm pretty actually happy with this overall form. Let me compare. I want to compare the height here to this. And it feels pretty close. And one of the things that we also discuss here in the show is, how we each have kind of our own tolerance for accuracy or inaccuracy. Whether you want to take more of an impressionistic approach where it's about getting the idea on the page, but manipulating the proportions to kind of extract something that's either deeper or some quality about the subject that you don't want to necessarily render literally. So some of you may be more impressionistic with that, or some of you may be more photorealistic with regards to the accuracy. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking some quick angle sighting observations. And so if you're new to drawing, what that means is that I'm going to have my reference image in front of me, similar to the comparative measuring we were using earlier. With one eye closed, again, flattening the depth perception, I can use my pencil as a guide and align it with an edge that I'm targeting in the reference. So in this case, if I'm looking at this angle of the snout, I can align it with that angle, lock my wrist, carry it directly on top of the image. In this case, I have the projection in front of me here. So I'm literally taking the angle here, placing it on top of the projection of the drawing, and I can compare the angles there. And if you focus on the big angles first, it can be helpful because then you can narrow that down a bit more later. So focus on the main angle here, and then we can go in and make it more specific and add the details. And as I build up these layers here, as I'm blocking it in, I'm trying to keep my pencil rolling so that I'm not developing any flat spots on the pencil core there. Now I'm going to use this negative space. Pay attention to the negative space here as I try to create this curve, because one of the things that this subject really helps me confront are these preconceived notions about about the subject. So for example, I know these horns that kind of wrap around and in front. So in my mind, I'm thinking about this curve, and what that can do is distort my perceptions of that horn. So especially with regards to its perspective, with this, if I could feel that upward curve at the bottom, but from this perspective, from this point of view, this is actually quite a bit shorter. There's some foreshortening here that I have to kind of pay attention to. And one way to kind of override that mental construct that might be driving my drawing process is to pay attention to that negative space. It's this shape here as a two-dimensional shape. Compare it to this as a two-dimensional shape. Squinting your eyes can really help with that as well. It helps to eliminate the details and help you to see the shapes objectively without labeling it as a horn or a snout or something like that may come loaded with these kind of preconceived ideas about how to draw it or what that shape actually is. So we're constantly battling the optical truth from the literal truth, or against the literal truth of the object. We know the literal truth of the horns, the shape, but then there's the optical truth. What does it look like from this perspective, from this position here? And those can sometimes be two different things. All right, Mad Moments Go, thank you. Nani, I'm a tattoo artist, so let's go. Great, welcome. That seems like an incredibly challenging art form. I see some tattoo artists out there, and it blows my mind what you're able to do. So Deanne is saying, I'm on my horns and they're really wonky. If you need any help, if you're able to provide a little bit more of a description about what's happening, I'd love to be able to help you out with that. Zeffy is using a ballpoint pen today. Way to go. That is a very permanent medium, and challenging. So that is awesome. I hope we get to see that if you can share that on Artist Network. All right, Stranger in Moscow, I appreciate those comments. And Chuck, welcome. And then Pam is asking, does it matter if you're off at the edge? Oh, if you're running the drawing off the edge, that's up to you. For me, it would be problematic. It's just my goal here is to help to develop my skills with getting the accurate proportions and layout properly. But your focus may be on something else. So you might just kind of lock in on what really what you want to take away from the drawing. So if you say, look, I'm willing to sacrifice the composition and say like some of these horns are going to run off the edge, but I'm going to focus on texture or value or something else, then there's that just becomes the objective of the drawing. And for this series, these are all exercises. I don't really do anything with the artwork here. I'm not going to be showing these or anything. It's really, these are just exercises to keep my skills sharp. But it may be different for you. And then you'll want to decide what you're willing to kind of live with in terms of inaccuracy, what you want to focus on. All right, so I'm feeling good about the overall proportions. It's feeling like it's feeling pretty good, although I still, let's see, something feels off here, but I can't quite figure it out. Maybe I'm just going to trust it. I'm going to continue to trust these proportions, because sometimes what can happen is that our own perceptions of the subject in our drawing can vary. As it starts to become more fleshed out, as it starts to take on more of a three-dimensional quality, then we'll start to interpret the shapes a little bit differently. And so I'm feeling like there's something off here. but I can't quite figure it out. Everything seems to be, this right here. There's a section. Because what I'm doing is I'm looking at this negative space and it's not quite lining up. So I'm trying to figure out where it needs to be adjusted. This is where I might need to actually do some erasing. So use this to start to do some negative drawing, some subtractive drawing, cutting into that negative space. Because having an area that will be white, laying it in as a dark mark can be really challenging, and I think that's what was happening. So I need to keep working this. Again, do some kind of subtractive drawing. And then in that, now this this shape feels off here. So I'm just going to keep refining it. What I like about this modified grip that I have here, so I'm using the side of the pencil, but I can just easily roll my hand up to use the tip when I need to get a more precise edge, and I can lay it flat when I can be a bit more gestural. Now, so I'm just comparing the angles of that curve. So right in here. So now I'm actually going to use the negative space, cut into this form a little bit. Trying to prioritize mass over line. And that's starting to feel a little bit better. And then down in here, we get the shadow of this horn. And I'm flattening it out. There's accidentally. So that's feeling a little bit better. And I look at some of these great wildlife artists, online, and especially here in Colorado, we get a lot of good wildlife artists. And what they do is they really study the anatomy of these animals, and that can be really powerful. All right, it feels much better. I think I still have I have to resolve this a little bit more, but I'm going to give it a little bit more. I need to work that a little bit more. So I'm going to wipe this down, building up a haze, kind of smoothing things out, but it's really just gently wiping it down. And you'll see me do this a lot. Well, I like to do that because it helps to unify everything in the drawing. We talked about that before, is that there's a balance between variety and unity. Every time you make a mark, you're creating a variation on the page, and that creates a level of excitement in the work. But you also run the risk of breaking apart the drawing and making it feel less unified. So, I mean, the most unified you can get it in a drawing is at the very beginning when you have a completely white page. Every mark you make starts to create a division. And so by wiping this down, you're starting to unify things a little bit more. So you're kind of bringing things back, bringing those marks together. Then we're going to break it apart more and then bring it back. Hello from Bulgaria. Awesome. Hello from India. Howdy from Texas. And then Mary C is maybe check the bottom of the horn across the snout. Yeah, I'm gonna need to come back to that. That was an early kind of division, taking that horizontal guide. So let's see where we're lining up right now. So right now I have the bottom of the horn aligning really with the mouth, the opening in the mouth. When I compare it to the reference, it should be a little bit lower. So let me see, does this feel too high? It does. And then what I observe now is that this feels too short. So I'm feeling good about this upper form. Thank you, Mary, for pointing that out. That was a good observation. I need to, let's see. Let me give a little bit more definition here to the mouth. So I have some more to work with. And then I'll compare that to the bottom of the horn. So I should be able to take this right across here, and then the bottom of the horn would come down here. And now this is what might be helpful is to establish kind of the apex of that curve, the lowest part of that curve. And where is that? It's pretty much right below this. So if that becomes the lowest point, then I know I'm going to kind of travel upward here, travel upward. This is where I need to kind of contort myself a little bit. Good observations there, Mary. And then let me think. I'll use my kneaded eraser. I've got this is kind of throwing off the form, seeing those old lines. So lift up some of that. There we go. That feels much better. And I still might need a little bit of massaging around in here, but I think we're getting closer. Thank you. And so much can be done just through the power of suggestion. Again, we kind of talked about that at the top of the episode, is I'm going to try to use that to my advantage in this drawing. So letting the viewer's mind fill in the gaps, suggesting detail, and if you get the light and shadow right, if you get the basic form correct based on its the play of light and shadow, that can go a really long way. And so we can start to see that the shape of the horn forming through light and shadow, and it's already starting to then kind of fill my mind with the texture. I'm associating certain textures with that horn and perceiving them even though they're not really visible. All right, so I'm just looking at some larger masses of light and dark. This gets really kind of tricky in here. So I'm going to keep my eyes unfocused. I'm letting my eyes be blurry. And I'm trying to observe this play between light and dark. And we'll sharpen up these forms a little bit later. So with a fairly heavy pressure, I can start to lay in a bit more pressure on the pencil. And the tip here is pretty dark. And it fades a little bit to the light there. All right. Yeah, all right, so just checking to see if there's any other questions. Krisha is asking, how much would the sketch cost with a frame? Gosh, I don't know. It's a good question. Pricing artwork is really hard. So, it's one of those things, I talk to other artists about it too, and it's, there's no real standard. Again, I'm not doing any of these drawings in the show with the intent of selling them. This is purely, these are exercises to improve. But I'm not great at offering prices. All right. What do we need to do? Okay, I'm just going to keep building up these values. So now I'm taking more of a critical look at the larger shapes and the larger value relationships, in particular the horn here. keeping my eyes really soft and focused because I don't want to get bogged down by the details yet. And one thing I'm observing here is that the core of the dark is kind of right in along here. We can start to see this path that originates here, set in from the edge, kind of right above the eye, kind of transitioning up from the eye. And then it kind of wraps up, and then it transitions right into the edge of the horn there. But then we get lighter here where it's almost lost there against that light background. It's a very light contrast. And then here on the inside of that horn, it falls into shadow. So we get a little light here. It gets really dark here along this bottom edge. So as I'm working along that edge, I'm trying not to establish a line that we then fill in. I'm kind of working back and forth up to the edge and into the form. And then I want to try to observe this transition along in here. So what I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to tone this whole thing, gradually get lighter. And I'm not going to protect this edge here. I'm going to use my eraser to cut that back out. We can define that edge a little bit more. But having some sort of lost and found edge can be really helpful. I had moments ago saying another person who hates putting prices on the work. It's so hard. All right, so I'm just kind of, right now I can feel myself getting a little bit out of focus. My brain is a little scattered right now, so I need to bring myself in. So I'm just kind of making some mental notes here. I don't want to get too bogged down in any one area. And one of the things that you can see that I'm really starting to build up some graphite on my hand. If I let my hand rest on the drawing here, I'm going to keep smudging this. Since I know that's going to happen, I don't want to finish this yet. And I can try to. I have this kind of raised edge on my drawing board, and that helps to give me a pivot here, so I don't have to rest my hand on the drawing. But I don't like that being one of the factors that I have to pay attention to while I work. So I've kind of worked into my process the expectation that I'm going to have to reestablish things in the drawing. Everything's going to get dirty, and it's going to get smudged. And so I just kind of work that into the process. And as I let some of the graphite fill in some of these lighter areas, I can use that to my advantage, because especially on the snout and along the horn here, we get these highlights that are pretty bright. And if I let some tone build up in some of these other areas, that provides a subtle contrast. So pull these out. Those are gonna be the kind of the tonal highs in the drawing, right in that area. Okay, so I think what I can do now is I start to finish and add some details to this side of the drawing. So what am I observing? Antic City is asking, would you ever shade something like that with cross-hatching? Yeah, I think yeah, cross-hatching is something that I probably will be utilizing. I used it quite a bit in this preparatory sketch here. You can see where I'm starting to build up hatch marks here. So I'm hesitating answering that for some reason, and it's because I don't think I gave it a whole lot of thought in the previous one. It becomes an instinct as I go. So when I utilize it, if I'm making a conscious choice, I want to be able to articulate what I'm really thinking about in that moment. So that's a really good question, and let me see if I can introduce that in this process here in a bit. So at this point, the drawing really kind of accurately represents what I'm observing in the reference image, because my eyes are blurred. Of course, it's black and white versus color, but I'm trying to observe the subject with that level of detail. And the more I stay with this, I think that the stronger the form is going to be. And I had to learn to kind of delay the gratification of adding those details. And part of that learning came through kind of trusting that if I just stay with this kind of blurred interpretation of the form longer, it'll translate to a more accurate rendering later. But it's hard to, it was really hard initially for me to do that, because so much of that satisfaction comes in when we add those details, right? And you want to just get to it. So I need to kind of drop the tones. And so I just talked about kind of finishing this edge, but I realized that I wasn't quite there yet. I think I needed to I needed to get more of this established. So what I'm trying to do at this stage, though, is to not think too critically about what I'm looking at, and just see it in its abstract form, a collection of light and dark shapes that have specific sizes and values, right? So if I think this is a snout, this is, you know, the structure of the eye, the shape underneath the eye. If I think about it anatomically, it's going to give me some trouble. And so I'm trying to just think about it as shapes of light and dark. I'm going to take an axis measurement comparing both of the eyeballs, and then compare that to the drawing. And that places it right around here. And so one of the things you get good at the more you draw, you know, for those of you who have been drawing for a long time, be curious if this is true with you, but we talk about that a lot here, is when before you make a mark, there's this quick mental check-in of where you are. So as I was looking at this, placing this eye here, I was taking this axis measurement. It's a little bit angled. It's not quite horizontal. But then I'm also doing a quick check and drawing a plumb line mentally, seeing where this is relative to this horn, where it is relative to the snout, and doing some quick angle sighting to check in where is this relative to some of the other features. So I'd be curious to hear from you all who've been drawing for a while. Is that something that you do naturally? Does it become second nature? You know, is it something that any of you still get stuck on? Because sometimes it feels like there's so much to pay attention to. The more you draw, it becomes, again, second nature. Your brain puts all those processes together. That can sometimes lead to these actions that become almost subconscious, and we're doing things that we don't really realize we're doing. So by putting kind of attention and focus on them, it can be helpful sometimes, but it can also throw things off. It's one of the things I remember talking with art teachers about is, you know, what is the role of your consciousness while you're working, right? You know, is our goal to be entirely conscious of every decision we make, or is our goal to kind of shed that and just be in the moment reacting to the subject? Do your thinking before and after the drawing process, but not during it, right? And it's really hard to kind of be, to kind of find that balance, and I'd be curious to hear what you all think about that. But all right. So just kind of, I'm just exploring some of these light and dark forms. And so then, yeah, this is what I'm trying to do is make sure that I'm not relying on lines here, especially inside this form, thinking about just shapes and edges. So as I look at this dark, kind of the eyebrow here, where it's dark, rather than draw a line along this path, it's observing this path and then creating it as an accumulation of marks that run in that different direction there. So creating a shape and a value relationship to define that form rather than a linear definition of that object or that form. Okay. Lynn, welcome. You'll draw later. Glad you could make it. And Tick City, I'm glad this is working for you. If you do have any questions, I'm going to keep thinking about that cross-hatching. There's so many different ways that you can build up values, but again, it's become kind of a second nature thing. I'm kind of reacting to forms rather than making a conscious decision to use one technique over the other. So I do want to keep talking through that. So if you do have any questions about shading technique, feel free to throw them out here. Anybody here in the group can help answer your questions, and you're probably going to get a variety of them. So. And then School Troop White Tea, try drawing doodle characters and like anime characters. It's good practice. I agree. All drawing is good. So whether you're drawing anime, whether you're drawing kind of more realistically, I guess, then if you're drawing from life or you are drawing from your imagination, whatever, all drawing is good. And it can be helpful to have kind of specific exercises to develop specific skills, but I think all drawing is good. So kind of going into the shading technique, I'm intentionally using the side of the pencil, so it's really more of a smudging technique. Again, because I'm not ready to add kind of sharper edges to anything. And what I find is that I like the lines that are created by side of a pencil as well as the broad marks. So when you're using the side of the pencil, if you're scraping it up and down like this, kind of a perpendicular motion to the axis of the pencil, it creates a broad mark. But if you drag it along its core, you can create really nice, fine, natural looking marks. So all right, let's feeling better about this. What am I looking at here? And the snout, I feel like needs to have a little bit more structure here. There's this interesting ridge here. I know we get to, here in Colorado, it's not, when relatively a short drive, we can be in places where we see nice big herds of these guys. And they're pretty awesome. So now I'm going to try to observe the form of the nostrils here. And again, kind of talking about that symbolic thinking and symbolic observations. You know, we know generally the snout is a symmetrical thing. The left and the right nostrils are generally the same size. But because of this 3/4 turn, the proportions are shifted. So I want to observe the asymmetry more than the symmetry here. And I've talked about that before. Like I have a tendency to create kind of these, create symmetry in regularly spaced objects, just getting into a rhythm of mark making, and the next thing you know, everything is kind of evenly spaced. When drawing from nature, it's very rare to have things that are evenly spaced, and so I have to make it a conscious choice to observe asymmetry and irregular rhythms in things. Those comments there about manga and anime drawing, it's been a long time since I've done any drawing like that, and it makes me want to give that a shot. I kind of fell in love with observational drawing from life. And I think whenever you can, I mean, if you're going to learn the most about drawing, I think working from life. You know, of course, we're working from photographs here, and I think there's a lot you can develop from that as well. But part of this whole show was designed because I realized as a painter, I paint from life. I go outdoors and paint a lot, and I had kind of let my drawing skills kind of slack off. You know, I hadn't really practiced drawing and in a while, so I thought, well, this is locked inside now. This is a great time for me to practice that in preparation for being outside. And so, you know, when the show was spun up, we, you know, I had to make the choice to work from photographs, and it can be, again, I think there's so much we can learn from that. You know, I think if I could actually observe one of these sheep in life and draw from that for you guys, that would be even better. But I think again, there's a lot of value to working from a photograph. It holds still, which is nice. All right, so I'm kind of working this edge here, finding that edge of the head leading up to that horn. And you know, right in here, for example, there's a lighter edge, but rather than lighten it now, I'm going to darken the space around it. And I'm going to use these circular marks for now until I figure out really what direction I want to emphasize. So it's kind of moving back and forth right up to that edge and away and up to it to capture that edge there. I'm going to kind of lightly score this edge of that horn. It's a little bit darker here at the top. And what I'm trying to do is create kind of a smooth tone here. And then I'm going to give it a little bit more form by paying attention to the direction of the mark. So this is where kind of hatching could come in. But I feel like that, you know, so there's, you know, there are many different types of hatch marks that you can make. You can do what's called parallel hatching, where everything in the drawing is moving in the same direction. All the parallel marks are. You see artists like Leonardo incorporate that into their works. There's also what's called dimensional hatching, where you're using the hatch marks to reinforce the cross contour of the form, really using those marks to reinforce the three-dimensional quality, letting those marks wrap around that form, right? And I find that the dimensional hatching is really great for reinforcing the form. The parallel hatching is great for blocking in shadows and creating kind of areas, kind of washes of value that represent areas of light and shadow. So as we go down, I'm starting to observe these variations, these lines in the horns, and I'm not going to worry about making them 100% accurate. What I'm mostly concerned about is understanding the form and the general path that these are making. And so I may be missing one or two of these marks as we go along, but it will hopefully read correctly. I'm not going to get bogged down in really mapping out every individual form. So what I want to observe is this path as we travel up and around, and kind of let that edge along here soften and disappear. And then because that horn curves back around like this path here is constantly changing. And so I want to observe that. And one of the things that can be helpful is to employ kind of some indirect observation. So what I mean by that is, if I'm looking at this curve, I'm looking at the reference photo, I'm observing that curve, I'm putting my awareness on the curves below it. So I'm trying to compare those two, rather than observe each curve absolutely, right, and really I'm just focus on that shape and try to capture that shape, I'm looking at it with the mindset of comparing to other forms. So I'm trying to observe how do those lines vary as we travel along this edge, because I want to make it feel like it's curved back there. And so one of the things that can be helpful is as you observe the path, rather than, if I have a curve that runs like this, again, kind of observe that path, but create that mark with little squiggles that move perpendicularly to that path. And I get a little bit sharp there right against that eye. And so if I emphasize these vertical marks here, these vertical hatch marks, that'll reinforce that vertical nature of that horn as it wraps around behind there. That's the hope, at least. And so I think I want to be careful not to make any of these stripes that are on the horn hard-edged. Really, I'm going to actually soften them perhaps more than I'm comfortable with. And then try to sharpen them up later. Because if I don't want them to read like tiger stripes, right? They're a bit more subtle than that. If I squint my eyes at the reference, they disappear largely. So I don't want to overstate them. I want to get back and see if I missed any questions. Actually, I'm kind of erase this out, but I want to. This edge is it's going to be really important how I manage the edge here. Just kind of lifting a little bit more here. It's a bit too white, so I can wipe that down a little bit. Colleen is asking, what is the drawing next week? It is going to be a portrait of a young girl. It's going to be a direct on portrait. I haven't done those in a while. So we'll be doing a portrait next week. Kui is saying, every time I stand up and look at my sketch, I see where it's wrong. That's great. That's exactly, I kind of forgot to mention that. That's one of the things we always talk about is stepping back from your work and analyzing it, because that's exactly what you want. You want to be able to see those, especially earlier on in the drawing process. You want to see where you're off, because I've experienced that heartbreak of spending hours and hours working on a drawing, feeling like I nailed it, only to step it up and for the first time seeing that everything is off. I get all these details, but they're in the wrong place. And so, yeah, I'm glad you shared that. And hopefully you're just taking in that information, and I'm going to apply it to, uh-oh. Why did my camera die? No. It shouldn't have died. It says I still have half battery life, so we should be good. I don't know what that was all about, but the signal cut out, so we're back. Really hope it doesn't die again. So I'm going to move quickly. That's happened before. The camera's decided to quit, even though it's kind of plugged in and it should be charging as we go. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to intentionally give a little bit more sharpness to the horn here at its tip. To help bring that out. intentionally soften back there to help create that sense of it curving, and then we're going to bring it forward right in here. And so as I map that path, I'm going to try to be really gentle with the line work there because I don't want the lines to be too strong. Just kind of give myself a path to follow. But I'm running these vertically because there's this kind of quality to the horns there. It's really hard to see, or it looks like it's been broken and kind of scarred there. And I feel like it's going to give it a bit more dimension to change the direction of the marks, to keep it from running kind of parallel to that curve, parallel to that edge. So I'm really laying the pressure on pretty heavily to get some of these darker marks, and this is with that Derwent Onyx pencil. That can get really soft, and ebony pencil is equivalent. And then within that, get some of those variations. One of the other areas that I've always struggled with as well is with contrast. So when we really focus our attention, focus sharply on a certain area in the reference, it is we tend to heighten the value contrast and then overstate it in the drawing, and it's a very natural thing to do. And so it's an instinct that I have to fight to do that. And so one way to combat that is to kind of keep your eyes softly focused, kind of keep blurring the subject, and keep some of these value relationships subtle. All right. How's everybody else's drawing coming? I've heard from a few of you. There's right in here, there's this one little dark crack, and I want to get in there. And that helps to create this transition as we wrap around the horn there. And then there's this, I wonder what's happening here. There's this subtle light edge to the horn right in here that I want to lift out. Because now what I'm observing is that there's this change in the plane as we come kind of across that sheer kind of wall and then wrap around. And so there's a little bit of bounce light catching right in there that I wanted to capture. Okay. And then what's nice in this reference photo is how it just kind of fades into that light back there. So I'm going to switch back to the overhand grip. And as I start to apply more texture, see, I'm really kind of leaning in on the tip. So I'm supporting the tip so it doesn't break. And I'm going to try to suggest the texture of this horn a little bit. Actually, before I do that, I'm going to bring out the blending stump, knock down some of this texture. And I haven't lifted any. I'm gonna come back in and lift out the lights here in a bit. So I'm kind of thinking through that, and kind of preparing for that. But all right, so back to this. There's an interesting kind of these the way the striations work. There's like this. There are these paths that wrap around this way, and then there's paths that wrap around this way. And I want to try to observe both of those. I'm going to start by observing these paths a bit more. I don't know if that's a really accurate way of describing it, so if that doesn't make any sense, let me know. And so at this point, like the point of contact I'm making with the pencil is set in a little bit. You can see there's that curve there. So I'm not using the tip of the pencil. I'm using just set in from that. And I'm just going to react. This is really more gestural than anything. Now that I have the basic form established, I don't have to really think too much about getting the proportions correctly. I can just kind of react to these striations, the variations in the horn. And so as I'm doing this, I'm kind of rocking the hand, and so as I get up to that edge where I want that sharper edge, kind of engaging the tip a bit more. And then flattening it out to create a more broad mark. And I'm doing that. I like this technique because it creates a more natural looking mark than if I were to use the tip and then create these lines like this. And then you know, I can use those selectively to bring in a little bit more precision in some of these areas, but in general I like to use the side of the pencil. So hopefully that makes sense. And really wrap those marks around there to help create that form. Whew. And then this is where, you know, again, we can see these kind of striations that run this direction as well. So I'm going to incorporate some of those, suggest some of that. This is where, again, where if you have that kind of inclination, you can kind of really stay in this area and kind of hammer away at those details. But I just want to try to suggest them more than anything. If I get the values right and get kind of a nice gestural mark, it can create something that the viewer fills in later. A little bit of line work to sharpen that edge. You can see again, this is getting all messy back here, but that's all right. It's kind of atmosphere. Let's see, strictly my opinion, I did not realize how important it is to know the tones in sketching drawing really is. I had too much confidence all to be shot down. Oh, interesting. I'd like to hear more from that, strictly my opinion, what you're experiencing. So Mariana is saying the horn appears to widen before it curves toward the front of the ram. Yeah, it does seem like it does that. Like it's kind of like rounder here and then flattens out and then it gets narrow again. All right, by Fatima, thank you for the comments. Deanne, you started over and you're happy with the perspective, balance, and tone. That's awesome. All right. So I'm going to work my way across here. So as I kind of shift to the fur areas, it's a similar motion. So again, I'm using the side of the pencil, and I have, again, there's a bit of a taper here. And so really the point of contact is set in maybe a 1/4 inch from the tip. And it allows me to kind of rock the marks a little bit. And if I keep rolling the pencil in my fingers, then I'm not going to create these flat points that are going to give me trouble. I have access to these fine edges. And so I'm really thinking more about the direction of the marks and the length of those marks. So there's areas where the fur seems to be a little bit kind of longer, or kind of clumped down a bit more smoother, more smoothly, and then there's some where it's a little bit shorter. I'm just going to really focus on the flow, and here we can focus on the way the fur kind of wraps around that edge, kind of opens up, and then try to find the changing direction of the marks. So in a way, you know, we're doing some cross-hatching. Cross-hatching is where you have these layers of hatch marks that all move in different directions, but I'm trying to be intentional about the direction of those marks so that it reinforces the structure of the fur. Kind of smooth things out a little bit, get rid of the tooth of the paper to some degree. This is where it just gets fun to play with marks, right? And it's really easy to get lost in the mark making. So I need to remind myself to keep paying attention to the shapes that I'm targeting. So strictly my opinion, basically I had too much confidence that I could watercolor without all drawing. I had a rude awakening. That's a really good cautionary tale. I know exactly that feeling, and I suspect there's many of us here that have experienced that at some point, especially when it comes to painting. For me at least, there's this desire, this instinct to get right to the color and get kind of seduced by the brushwork and the color, and then neglecting the drawing. So again, that's kind of what led to this show, is because I had that similar kind of rude awakening. I realized that really what was holding back my drawings my paintings at that point was the drawing aspect of it, the proportions, the perspective, the edge work, the line work, things like that, the composition, that all can be solved through drawing decisions. But I hadn't really spent that time. And if by practicing the drawing, it in theory then speeds up my painting practice. So then I can just focus on color more because it becomes more second nature, all of these drawing decisions. So here, as I'm working on this, I'm thinking that I'm actually pushing the mark more than anything. You can see it goes back and forth, but I'm pushing up into this to create that kind of transition into these lighter areas of fur. Kind of working my way around to the structure of the eye, so then I can build that eye in there kind of more effectively. Brenda saying bottom lip is too thin. You are absolutely correct there. I got to remember that. So I'm kind of working my way down there. So I got to keep that in mind as I get to that, because I think I would have just trusted this without really looking at that. So I'm glad you called some attention to that. So again, this is really more kind of gestural thinking, where I'm thinking about flow, length of the marks, and where I need to go darker, I can lean in on the pencil a little bit more. But kind of trusting the materials to some degree. I'm glad the camera still seems to be working. I'm not sure why that cut out for me there, but gave me a mild heart attack. I'm just kind of jumping all over the place a little bit intentionally, because I'm kind of making these observations, kind of just stabbing and moving on to the next one. And then as I go, I'm going to need to start evaluating the contrast between some of these variations in here. We talked about that at the top of the show, is that it's not necessarily ideal lighting for the structure of the head. It really works well for the horns, but we don't get a strong contrast between light and shadow on the head to understand the structure very well. And so I need to be kind of mindful of that and see how that structure is playing out. So there's this little dark spot right here that I want to make sure that I'm placing properly. And then it changes direction. The fur changes direction as it wraps kind of around the lips here. This is going to be tricky. I wish this bar wasn't on here now because I'm not going to be able to do this bottom part. I'm actually going to have to flip things upside down in order to get that, because this thing is now in my way. And that wasn't an issue with the preparatory sketch because I didn't have it taped down. Oh, for crying out loud. Okay. Now we're back. It's the joys of a live show. I don't really know what's going on, but it seems to work to just simply reset the oh, no, come on. You may have to call it. I don't know why. It says I have plenty of battery. But there's an error symbol here. Okay, so I don't know if this is going to give me any more trouble, so I apologize for that. Again, it's the joys of working live, so I'm just going to go quickly now. All right, I think my camera has said it's done for the day. So I'm not sure here's what I'll do. I feel like we got quite a long ways. I'm going to keep working on this, and I'm going to post the finished drawing on Artist Network. So you'll find at the top of the chat here, you'll find the link to where you can share your work, and you'll see actually my preparatory drawing, the full one there, but I'll keep working on this one too, and try to post that there as soon as I can. So I apologize for the technical issues. I wish I knew more about why the camera decided to just cut out on me. Let me see if I just took a still photo. Let's see if this works. Okay. I just changed the settings a little bit, and I'm going to keep going. Okay. School Troop YT, come on. That's not a cool language, but I appreciate that it's nice. Let's see. I think it's working. Okay. Let me make some quick adjustments. All right, so it's not ideal, but I've changed the settings on the camera. Again, it's a little bit higher contrast now. This is not fun, I apologize. Okay, I'm just gonna keep going then. Whew. Mad moments go, yes, I do need more RAM. Could be my computer. Maybe it's just a little bit tapped out with regards to the power there. So coming back into this section here, I want to add a little bit more bulk to that lower lip there. So I think we're back. So I don't think we have to cut out. I hope we didn't lose too many people. If you're new and you just joined us and you're like, what is this? What is this craziness? We don't normally have these technical issues. We have before. Again, it's just the nature of live video. Let me adjust things here. There, that's a bit more accurate for what I'm seeing. So, whew. Mary C, thanks God I have experienced the blow up of equipment during a PowerPoint presentation. So you have my complete sympathy. Thank you. That helps. It's really nerve-wracking being live, but yeah, especially when it's technical issues. I suppose like it's a little even more nerve-wracking when it's my drawing is just not going well, and I think some of you have experienced that where the drawing itself is just not coming together. But this one I feel a little bit better about. So I'm just going to move quickly because I don't know how this is all going to play out. Let's see. I feel like those proportions are a little bit better now. How many of you, I'm curious about like the technique. I realize that, we talk a lot about the kind of the overhand grip that I'm using. And I'm kind of curious to see how you all feel about the pencil grips that you're using. Is it like it's something that I've worked this way for so long that it, in a way, still becomes, it's more comfortable than working with this tripod grip. So if I switch like this, it feels really confining to me. But I'm kind of curious to see how you all feel about it. Anybody prefer an overhand grip or prefer a tripod grip? And get that. I'm kind of, again, I'm working a little bit more quickly because I don't know what my camera is going to do. It's so much fun. I need to slow down a little bit, I think, because yeah, I'm just kind of curious about the whole tripod grip. There's the eye, kind of like that. This is too wide here. I feel like the eye is too small. And I'm kind of scattered right now, so I'm not focusing as clearly as I'd like to be. But it is what it is. I'm just glad that the camera seems to be working so that we don't have to give up on this episode. Because I am actually having a lot of fun on this one. It was a little scary at first, but all right, thank you for all the supportive comments. You guys are awesome. This is what I love about this show. And that's why we wanted to do it, is just having a community. It's fun to draw with other people. There's definitely moments when I prefer to draw alone, but there's something to also having a community. And what I like is that we live in a world now where we can make that happen. So what am I doing? I feel like there's this kind of light area here that I can add a little bit more kind of dimension to and really kind of wrap things around, kind of reinforce that that structure. This is where the direction of the marks can play a big role in the way the form is expressed. Because we pick up on those subtle variations, and it can make a difference. And just by changing the direction of the mark, you can get the value and the shape correct. Everything looks great, but just by changing the direction of the mark can sometimes really pull a drawing or painting together. And so as you can see that my fingers here are really picking up a lot of graphite. So when I'm making this mark, this hand is really resting on the page. And that's giving me another kind of layer of control in terms of that pressure. So I'm just going to do some parallel hatching down here because I can't quite get my hand contorted properly. And that's all right. I feel like if anywhere where I can kind of slack on the form, it's down in this area. So again, just using the side of the pencil, and I'm giving myself a little bit more support, really kind of holding it like this. And I'm thinking about it, trying to make these. I'm trying to think about where the pressure is on each pass with that mark, so that it doesn't create these hard edges there. So it's kind of a rocking motion in a way. So there's a bit more pressure in the center of each pass in the stroke and lifting off the page a bit. So Adrian just says, just blame Windows 10. That's what I do at work. That's awesome. I wish. It's a Mac, and it's my Sony camera that I think is decided to I don't know, for whatever reason in the video setting, because I have this set up running as a webcam into OBS, which is the streaming platform, and that pumps out the feed. And for whatever reason, when I had it set as a video on the camera, which is what I normally do, so I don't know what's different today, but having it set as a video did not seem to agree with OBS for some reason. So now it's this camera settings as a point and shoot camera. All right, just kind of working those nostrils, and I'm kind of saving the high end of that tonal range, the lights. I'm saving for last, and we're going to bring in some nice contrast with that. I'm really glad that we get to continue this drawing and that my computer didn't crap out so entirely. I wanted to read more about the grip. Monica saying, I use that overhand grip right now, and I like it especially when doing the lines and the horns. Awesome. And strictly my opinion is I prefer how you do it alone when you're alone, your natural way. Yeah, I think about that a lot actually when drawing, and I'd be curious to hear more of your thoughts. But you know, I think we all have kind of a natural sensibility for how we're using our marks that gets translated in the drawings, just like we have a unique tone of voice. And that's what I love about drawing, is that can be expressed. And okay, so now let's see. I'm gonna let this area here stay soft. I think I need to smooth this out just a little bit. But I'm gonna let that stay soft, so then I can bring more sharpness into this horn and see if that contrast works to really bringing attention to that. And if there's too much contrast, then I can go back in and add detail there. Adrian is saying, tripod for detail, overhand mostly, and sometimes holding far back, kind of like a paintbrush. Yeah, holding it kind of like this. Yeah, that's a great way to really kind of soften. It's a really gentle mark, which is cool. That's a good point. And then Steven is saying, usually use overhand grip except when doing details. Adrian, but I switch hands a lot too. Oh, cool. So you're working ambidextrously. That's cool. Had to use marks that look like spokes of a wheel to get that horn shape and feeling. Still working to get that. So having fun. So Mariana, that's awesome. Yeah, that's going to be an interesting thing for us to pay attention to here, is the way the striations in the horn kind of radiate out. And so because not only do they wrap around this way, but then they also wrap around that way. All right, so I'm just gonna go for it here. And I'm gonna, I don't know, I'm just kind of reacting to it. It's really kind of gestural at this point. And I'm kind of observing this, this path along here where it gets kind of darker. And then there's this kind of crack here, which is really cool. And I want to place that properly. So I'm looking at it in relationship to the ear, and it's directly above the tip of the horn. And this is where I might switch to that tripod grip and observe that thin sliver of shadow. And then back to that overhand grip. But kind of getting back to that thought of kind of natural mark making, it's like, the term that we use here is that marks are thoughts, and that's what's really cool, is that every mark we make starts as an electrical impulse in the brain that travels down our arm into our pencil onto the page, and that's what I feel like is really powerful about drawing. And I think when I observe drawings, it's really cool to kind of think about that, kind of reverse engineer the marks and think backwards, try to think, observe those marks and observe the quality of the marks and say, what does it tell us about the mind that made those marks, right? And that gets really exciting when you observe the sketches of Leonardo, for example, or Michelangelo, or all these great artists. And you can kind of go back in time a little bit to kind of peer over their shoulders. It's one of the powerful things about doing a master copy is it's one of the exercises that I would always assign to drawing students is to do a master copy. But the objective isn't to create like a photographic representation or like a photocopy of it. The objective is to try to break down the marks and understand the impulse behind each mark, and then recreate that impulse to some degree. So if you see a quick mark, make a quick mark. If you can tell, when a mark is really controlled versus when it's kind of loose and expressive. And so then the image, the quality you try to replicate is of that spontaneity or something in the mark, rather than make it look exactly like that mark. But that's what I love about drawing. It's such a direct medium to the artist's mind, the person who made that drawing. So as I observe again these striations, it's not critical for me at this point to make a 100% accurate kind of photographic representation of this. I'm just trying to capture the quality of the horns that I'm observing, so it becomes more of an impression than anything. So, and the other advantage to this overhand grip is that you're constantly kind of sharpening the pencil, so when I need a fine line, I've got it available. So like right in here, I really want to have that sharp edge. So I can switch to that tripod grip. One of the things I have to be careful with this as I'm observing these striations and I'm moving up and down the length of the horn, I don't want those marks to read like zigzags. It's really easy to do that. And I've done that so many times that, like, not really paying attention, and next thing you know, I've got this zigzag across the the form. So I'm trying to be mindful of that as well. Yeah, switching to this tripod grip, I can really get these really darker darks in there, which is kind of nice. So if anything, what I'm trying to do is emphasize this portion of the horn rather than that edge, because if I draw a really hard line along this edge, it could flatten out. I'm going to lose that form. I'm going to let those edges kind of just fade into that. Marie is saying, I just bought pastel pencils and pastel paper to do a master copy of Franz Marc's Foxes. That's awesome. Good luck. Yeah, absolutely. I love working with pastels. We did here at Artist Network, I helped film a show we called Decoding Degas. And so there's an artist here in Denver, Desmond O'Hagan, that we worked with, and there was a show with Degas at the Denver Art Museum. And so I went to him and I said, hey, do you think about doing something with this? And he said, okay, what do you want to do? And I said, why don't let's try a master copy of Degas. And he says, oh yes, let's do that. And so we kind of filmed him as he explored creating a master copy of a Degas that was actually at, actually I don't think that piece was actually at the Denver Art Museum, but we went to the museum and we talked to the curator there and got a bunch of clues about how Degas worked, and we kind of worked with Desmond, and he kind of explains like what he's learning by doing that master copy. It was so much fun to do that that video. It's a two-part video series. And we filmed kind of a documentary portion and then kind of the workshops where Desmond really kind of works through the master copy there. All right. So kind of looking at these striations, one of the things that can be helpful is to kind of take it in chunks. So kind of observe what are the angles here versus here versus here versus here, and then kind of fill in the gaps between rather than progressing all the way through and hoping that they line up, to kind of jumping around from end to end and then gradually narrowing in that playing field that you're establishing. And there's some areas where I feel like I see the lines and striations that work this way a little bit more clearly, so I'm just kind of emphasizing those in some places. A lot of it is just kind of reacting, so it's kind of a gut response. I need to get darker in here. Okay, all right. Mad Moments Go is saying, I liked Renoir and copied his fruit still life. Nice. Renoir is a tricky one. He's an artist that I've never really studied. You know, when I really got into the French Impressionists, Pissarro and Monet particularly, and then discovered Cézanne, who that really blew my mind. But Renoir is one that I never really got into, but I'm not really sure why. I think there's only so many artists, you can kind of look at it one time. So as I'm working down this horn, I'm starting to observe the lightening here. And I really, right in here, it's really kind of critical, the curve, and then kind of following this path along here. So I think that's going to be ultimately what creates that form. So I'm going to bring in a little bit of line to sharpen up this edge rather than kind of breaking with that initial impulse to kind of eliminate line. I'm actually going to use line here because I kind of like this atmosphere back here, but it doesn't create enough contrast. It doesn't create enough definition. And I'm worried about darkening this and pulling everything over on this side. I want to, if I maintain more of a greater tonal range here, the center of the piece becomes anchored, and then but I can still create some of a dynamic quality and focus on the form by using a line on this side. But I just want to be really careful because I want to break that line up. If I create too much of a hard edge along that line, it's again going to flatten things out. So it's just a matter of being really selective with that line edge. And what's nice is that that horn itself is naturally just kind of bumpy and chunky. And actually, what I can do is lift up and clean up some of this area here. But this, the idea of kind of toning the page a bit, letting those tones build up on the edge and kind of blurring, something I do a lot in painting, so it kind of becomes natural for me. So as I focus on this curve, what I'm trying to do is rather than draw the curve like this, like I did earlier, now I'm trying to break that apart and see how the cross contour marks kind of wrap around. So kind of build it as an accumulation of these kind of cross contour marks that wrap up and around into that edge. And then the hope there is that it'll really feel more three-dimensional that way. So it becomes kind of a compound curve more, because I want to, it's such an interesting form because it wraps around this way, but it's also twisting and then kind of twists out a little bit at the end. And that's the part I want to capture. Again, if I have one solid mark that wraps along in here, then we could end up losing that twist. And then we have this really nice darkening underneath here. And it starts to get a little bit lighter towards the tip. All right. Class de hand. Good luck with the drawing. I look forward to seeing that, Marie. Okay, just kind of suggesting some of the striations here. So we have these marks running down at this angle here, and I need to kind of transition up to some of these other angles. And then what I start to observe is there's this little hook at the end that creates that three-dimensional turn. Get back in there and get these little cracks. This is really kind of a nice focal point up there that I want to accentuate. Whew. Again, I feel like I'm just kind of jumping all over the place, but it's necessary. And so as I get back into this horn, this part of the horn, I see these lines, but they're much more subtle. And the thing that stands out to me is how these stripes kind of wrap around, and they really darken at the base. So I'm trying to put a little bit more emphasis on the lower part here where it gets darker, and then lift a little bit more at the top. And then remind myself, only make a few marks and then reset my mind so that I don't fall in this pattern of creating this kind of these rhythmic marks. And I feel like I've made these too dark, but that's all right. I can lift those a little bit. All right, so if I feel like I've taken this far enough, we're on about 2 hours. I don't want to. You kind of get the point now if you want to add a little bit more detail. So I've kind of taken the dark marks kind of far enough for now. Now let me bring out the eraser, and this is where I can start to really push that tonal range a little bit. So I'm looking at areas where the light's a little bit stronger, like right along in here. And then with this eraser, kind of thinking about it as a drawing tool, as a mark-making tool. It's not, the eraser is not just a tool for correction. And if those of you who've been with the show for a long while, you've heard me say that numerous times. You're probably getting sick of me here saying that, but for those of you who are new, think about the eraser, think about the blending tool always as an opportunity to contribute to the form. Sometimes we get stuck in thinking that tools only have one purpose. So an eraser is a tool for correcting mistakes, but it's also kind of more powerfully a tool for making increasing the mark variation. So now I'm looking at some of the lighter marks, and I'm trying to draw with the eraser in the same way that I drew with the graphite. So just lifting off some of those highlights. I can, if I follow along the cross contour a bit, and so this eraser, it's a kind of a rectangular eraser that I took a razor blade and I cut it into this wedge, and that gives me access to a variety of marks. So I can have like a broad mark, I can have a nice sharp edge. And then let's see. What I want to do is I want to pull a little bit of texture here. And I like to play with the pressure a bit. So if you use a light pressure with a rubber eraser, it'll actually start to blend the marks, and that can create a really interesting form. So what I'll often do is I'll start with just a really light pass of where I want to focus my marks, let things blend a little bit, and then if I need to pull out a sharper edge, I can just lean in on it a little bit more. But there are these ridges here that I want to suggest. And so you can see that this finger right here is actually kind of helping me float the eraser off the page just a little bit. And then you can see that lost and found edge. I let that edge just kind of disappear, and it sharpens up a little bit here, perhaps a little bit too much. And then I want to by just very lightly dragging that eraser, it can create some really unique blended marks that simulate the texture. And so look at the structure of the light and shadow on these. You see the dark marks representing these shadows and the ridges. And then the eraser can lift up some of the highlights. bounce over on this side a little bit. I can add a little bit more structure here. And then, you know, with that sharpened eraser, you can also kind of simulate highlights on some of the fur. So the kind of similar thinking, just kind of paying attention to the length and the direction of the marks and lifting up some of the highlights that can bring a little bit more depth and dimension to this part of the ram here. Right in here, the light's really catching along that edge. And then right in here. And I think we're at the point where we can call it good. Again, I mean, I feel like if I had a few more hours, I could just keep going and adding layers and layers of detail. But I think we captured the spirit of this guy pretty effectively, and it's just a great way to kind of build kind of confidence in some of the marks that we're making, build up that toolbox of marks that we have available to us. And then hopefully kind of simulating the texture to a sufficient degree that we fill in the rest of that information. Oh, I can erase this and then use that negative space to render that ear. So I could keep working on this forever, so I needed to call it a day at some point, right? So I think now, that's about it. So I want to thank you all. I'll hang on for a few more minutes to see if there's any other kind of lingering questions or observations. But I want to thank you all again for your patience. Thank you for sticking with me through some of the technical challenges. It's been a lot of fun. I really like just the texture and the form of these is exactly what I was hoping to dig into and find joy in exploring. So I feel like we did that. Let's see. Heather's asking, is that Decoding Degas a video available on Artist Network? Yes, it is. Yeah, we have it, especially for members. I believe they have access to all of those videos, and I believe you can purchase it as a download. Roberto, greetings from Mexico. Strictly my opinion, awesome. I have one of those erasers, so that helped make sense instead of all the smudge on the paper. Nice. And Klaus DeHaan is saying, I like the marks. Often you see those drawings where everything is blended. Great drawing. Thank you. I appreciate it. I think about that too. Like for me, I really like, I don't know, I really like the quality of marks. Sometimes you leave a mark on a drawing, not because it's describing the subject effectively, but because it looks cool. And I really like that there's an abstract quality to it. And then that's something that I like as well. So I'm glad to hear that I'm not the only one. I do really like, we see some drawings out there that are really highly polished, and I like those as well. But I think about for what again, the drawing experience that I like to have for myself is one where I really kind of explore more expressive mark making. And so, yeah. Okay, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. Yeah, I'm glad you all, again, stuck with it. I will see you all next week, 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll be drawing a portrait of a girl. So if you go to artistnetwork.com, the Drawing Together page has a kind of a bit of a preview of what you'll see at the thumbnail will show you what the reference image is. So I'm still working on that. I started it just before the show, but this is where we're going to be working on tone paper. This is just the gesture that I'm going to need to see now. There's some definite proportion work that needs to be done. So that's what we'll be focusing on, is that portrait. So join me again next week, Wednesday, 3 p.m. Eastern. We'll dig into that portrait. I'm scared because those are really hard. So I just do my best, but that's why we're here, is to learn and grow and get better. And then Rebecca's saying, not quite sure about the far eye, is struggling. Yeah, I've kind of, you can see I kind of forgot about that one, because it's so subtle, that I kind of left that. So well, maybe I can try to sharpen that up a little bit. I don't know. I got to give a little bit more attention, I suppose. But yeah. And then strictly my opinion is I overdo it with the shadows. That can be, that's something that I really struggled with as well. And one of the things that helped me is that was to think about dropping the highlights more. I found that I keyed everything up to light, and then when I dropped a shadow in there, the shadow would feel too dark. So if I started with a lower key and dropped those values down first, then build the shadows and spent more time controlling the light side, that's what helped me balance things out a little bit better. So I'm not sure if that resonates with you at all, or if anybody else has any thoughts about it, but yeah, there you have it. Awesome. Well, it looks like all the comments have come in. So I want to thank you all for joining me. I will see you all next week.